Good evening. I'm Dave Neff with the Carnegie Historical Museum Board, and this evening we are honoring the August Johnson and, is there a third name? Sandquist. Oh,
Yeah,
you're Dee Sandquist. Okay.
It keeps changing.
Yeah. So, Diane.
Okay, hi, I'm Diane Johnson Schleier, and I am the daughter of Don and Doris Johnson. This is my sister, Dee Sandquist, Dee Johnson Sandquist. And we have a brother who is deceased, Doug Johnson, which many of you in the community know. Mm-hmm. So we're here to tell the story about our family farm, Dondo, and how we were fortunate enough to get it and how it started. And since Dee's been reviewing the history, I'm going to let her explain where it started and coming on down.
So the reason Diane and I are here is because the piece that we have of the original farmland started in 1862 with John August, who was our original ancestor from Sweden, who was so poor in Sweden he couldn't afford shoes. So at age 13 he started working very hard, made enough money to bring he and his parents to America. Eventually found their way to Chicago. He worked for the railroad over there for a while. His boss stole $200 for him. So somehow he ended up floating down a raft on the Mississippi to Keokuk, worked at Burlington, and found his way to Jefferson County, probably because there were a lot of Swedes here. And so this part of the land, Diane and I have, and then the other part with our brother, the home place where we grew up, our sister-in-law Lynn has. And so that's why that farm's a century farm, because it didn't start until 1888. So tonight we're here to talk about the 1862 plus the overall family. So we're talking about that family history. So the first one was John August, and he had children. Several of them died. Back in that day, it was unusual for every child to make it to adulthood. And so from that, he had 4 children. So eventually, I guess he owned about 400 acres, and each child got 100 acres. So through the years, that's all gotten divided. And the next generation was Emma, his daughter, and then this is where Christian Johnson came in, who built the barn and the original house where Diane and I grew up on that farm, which our sister-in-law Lynn now has. But when you go by there and see that barn, it was built in 1888 by our great-grandfather. The next was Edith Johnson
And
Elmer Johnson. And so they were our grandparents. And then next were our parents, Don and Doris Johnson, who probably had the longest time on the actual land as far as caretaking, and we believe in taking care of the land for future generations. One of the things we're very happy about is our dad was very active in soil conservation and won a soil conservation award. And last year, my husband and I won the same award several years later, so we thought that was kind of fun, and our parents would be proud. A couple stories that I found reading through some family history that our Aunt Arlene, who was a Johnson, our dad's sister, was that our dad had graveled the road to the one-room schoolhouse that he had to walk across the field to, and when he was a child, but he was trying to be nice. This would have been probably in the 30s or 40s. So he graveled this road, and the teacher got mad at him because evidently you got paid more if you taught on a mud road. And here he was trying to do a good deed. The other thing was our granddad, who I believe Diane remembers, but he passed away before I was born. Elmer got the Spanish flu in 1918, and our dad was 1 year old then, and our aunt said he was never the same after that, our granddad was never the same, sorry. Our granddad got the Spanish flu in 1918 and was never the same after that. He was left with rheumatoid arthritis, which at that time they didn't have medications, so he was never, he was often sick after that, and so our dad had to step up being the oldest and do a lot on the farm. Our grandfather, Elmer Johnson, went to Salina to church, and the pastor rode the train to Beckwith, Iowa, which is just a spot in the road now. And then our granddad would pick him up with a horse, take him down a big hill over so he could preach his sermons, and then go back to Mount Pleasant on the train. So the train was quite important to the area that our ancestors grew up with. During the Depression, our aunt wrote that the earth dried up so badly in 1935 and 36, and the economy was already poor, but those were really poor farming years, and it was a real struggle for all farmers to make it through then. Dust swirled around. There were cinch bugs, and the way that they could prevent the cinch bugs from crossing the road was to put tar down the middle of the road, because they didn't have pesticides back then. So those are just some highlights.
Right. I want to add, this is fascinating. When my grandparents sold the farm to my parents, we have the contract. It's all handwritten.
In pencil.
Looks like my grandmother's handwriting. And to give them, a couple of dozen eggs a week, and so many dollars at the end of the year. But it was just, so different than what we have for contracts now. So it's very interesting. So we ended up, I'll say, with our part of the farm because our father and a brother farmed together. And they didn't want us, well, we never did, but they wanted to feel like they had treated us equally to our brother, because when you farm with a father and a son, there are some advantages. So that's why we were able to get the land that we have and share together. And we called it Dondo, for Don and Doris. And so that's why it's the Dondo farm.
After our parents.
Right. Our mother, if you remember her, she had a lot of things like that. She'd use Dondo. That's why everybody's name was a D. Started with a D because Don and Doris was a D, So then the kids were Diane, Doug, and Dolores, which prefers D. So.
Good choice. Wonderful. Well, you have explained a lot of good history here to our audience, and I'm very thankful that you're able to document all this stuff and to be able to share it. If it's appropriate, I would like to ask you some questions, unless you have more family history pieces you'd like to go with. Okay. When you were growing up, were there specific chores that you had responsibility for?
I think it was help on the farm. And our mother raised chickens. And it started out with capons. And for people that don't know, this was an injection that was given to them to make them gain weight, get fat and heavy. And we were told they were sold in Chicago, that people in Chicago wanted this kind of poultry. So I remember having to go out and help catch these when it was time to sell them. And I was wearing gloves and all kinds of because of that. And then after that, she raised laying hens. She had 2,000 laying hens. And so I think she spent most of the time, but occasionally we would help with the feeding and gathering the eggs. And then she spent a lot of time in our old cellar candling them to make sure that they were good eggs, and so they could be sold.
Okay.
And I remember riding with her to Mount Pleasant because that's where we took the eggs.
Okay, that was your sales stop over at Mount Pleasant.
As far as my job on the farm, I always loved riding with my dad and brother in the field, and so as soon as I was old enough to drive a tractor, I started, and that's what I did for my summer job. So I started, I would think I was going into 6th or 7th grade, and I was riding on the little Ford, which had a 2-row cultivator on it. And my dad said, "Here, you drive." And I go, "Really?" And so he went 2 rounds with me, and he goes, "Okay, you'll be fine. I'm going to go do chores. I'll be back."
He turned you loose at 2 rounds. Oh, my.
So from then on, there I went, and I loved it.
Good, terrific. Okay, we had Jefferson County Hospital, but did the doctors come out? Did they make house calls when you would have a cold or flu or anything else like that?
Not that I recall. We went to the hospital.
You would-
I will tell a story prior generation to that. Was my dad said one day he had to take his little brother, Lawrance, or Red, to school with him. And neither one of them were very happy about it. It was the one-room school, Buchanan number 5, for those people that know where that was. But when they got home, they had a baby sister. So
Magic.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Very good. Thank you so much. Were the children, I'm saying if you go to the hospital, so the children were probably born in the hospital then. When you were
yes.
born, you were born in the hospital and not at home on that. Would you have big family reunions? Would you have gatherings for 4th of July or other Christmas events and things? Would you have a lot of people that come together?
Our parents married brothers and sisters, married brothers and sisters. So that cut down on the immediate relatives. And I don't think I figured that out until I went to college and met my husband, and he comes from a family, there's 5 siblings, and I'm like, where do all these people come from? And so we had a very close family and a lot of gatherings, birthdays. Usually 4th of July was working in the field. That's how we felt celebrated, and maybe at night we could go watch fireworks.
Okay. Very good. Terrific.
there were extended, large extended family reunions a couple times a year.
Okay, a couple times a year that you would do that. Good. Well, I'm learning personally about a larger family because I was a single and my older cousin was a single and there were 3 others. But now our son is in a family, and when they got married, they said, "Would the whole Fonke family please come over so we can get a picture?" 50 people got up and walked over. They get together every month and have whoever birthday you bring your cake. And so I'm learning on this. Okay, were there other family members that were in Jefferson County?
We're related to probably half the county if you go back far enough, because our mother's side, the Ringelspaugh side, both parents came from Germany back in the 1860s, 70s, 80s. And on that side, Grandpa Schmidt came over here and then went back to Germany to fight in the Prussian War, and then came back here. So we have family, Smithburgs are relatives, Pat Kessel's a relative. But if you go back far enough, as my grandma called them, shirt-tail relation.
Yeah.
Good.
Schaefer's.
Were there any side occupations on the farm besides driving the tractor and picking up the eggs and things? Did anybody work in town? Did anybody have other responsibilities?
Our parents were always very active in the community, and our dad was at Grinnell Mutual Insurance as a president for several years. Then he did a lot of volunteer and community service types of things. Our mother, when I got in about 8th or 9th grade, started working part-time at the assessor office at the county courthouse.
Very good. So there was, I know from my growing up in Fairfield, the Johnson name, and I see your dad and mom involved in different things, so terrific.
Very active, yeah.
Okay, before we had Walmarts, before we had Dollar Generals, would your parents, would your mom, other folks make your own clothes? Was the sewing a part of the family tradition?
Yes, it was.
We learned to sew from our mother,
Right.
Okay.
yeah, and did that
Yeah.
pretty well growing up.
Right. And had them for 4-H projects.
Okay.
So I want to deviate just a minute.
Please.
Because our mother would never forget of us if we didn't tell this part she mentioned. Charles Schmidt also was one of the founding members of the Lutheran Church and helped build the Lutheran church in
Fairfield.
Fairfield. And she was very proud of that fact, and that somebody in her family has been a member ever since the church was built until the present time. So,
Wonderful. That doesn't happen too often.
No, it
That-
doesn't.
That is
Yeah.
great. Thank you for sharing that. Terrific. I know my mom had a wringer washer. What did you folks use? Did you use tubs, wringer washers? How did you do laundry?
I remember the wringer washer,
Mom did.
and every Monday it was wash day, and that's when the laundry got done. I'm guessing I was in maybe 6th, 7th, 8th grade when she got a washing machine like we'd know nowadays, an automatic.
Yeah,
And you'd have a chance to hang the clothes outside.
right.
What would you do in the wintertime? Did you hang them outside, or was there a place in the basement, or how did you
It
do it?
wouldn't have been in the basement because it was an old-fashioned cellar. I honestly don't remember. I guess it'd been in the house.
Must have been there was a room dedicated to the washrooms, so I think they were probably hung in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause
So I'm going to deviate from your questions,
Please.
but I'd like to talk about getting water and bathing facilities in the house.
Please.
So when my parents got married,
1943.
43, they got electricity. So and then I think there was a pump in the house for water.
A hand pump.
Hand pump, yeah. But we got bathrooms in 1953 when Dee was born. She brought us bathrooms.
Yay,
So
Dee. Way to go.
3
just think
kids,
that's it.
evidently you need a bathroom.
so I just thought that was an interesting side.
Yeah. Terrific. Did you have your own livestock, cows? You mentioned chickens before. What all did you have that you'd have to tend to?
Yeah, cattle, hogs, occasionally lambs.
I remember baby lambs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Chickens.
Yeah, and just thinking about milking cows, our dad never liked to milk cows. We would have 2 to 4 maybe to milk. And so I remember helping a little bit. We were never really required to do chores. We were just asked to help here and there. And so my mom got undulant fever from the unpasteurized milk. Brucellosis is the actual disease. And so anyway, after that, then we got an electric pasteurizer for the milk. And then we were the first family in the neighborhood to get milk delivered to the door when it was available. So
Terrific. Okay. Well, I hear so many stories, and I look forward to hearing the individuals there. When you would build construction, when you would have a barn or you would have a new shed or something for the cattle, did you folks build it yourself, or did you invite carpenters to come in and do the building of those?
I think they did both.
Okay.
Some of everything. You were mentioning about shopping a while back.
Yes.
So I remember there was a small store over in Beckwith, Iowa, that had everything you really needed. And I remember one time, our dad would I remember going with Doug over there, and we'd get 5 cents, you could have an orange or a grape pop
For a nickel?
for a nickel.
that was a real treat.
Yeah, and that was a real treat.
Terrific. Let's talk about your church. You mentioned before the Lutheran church and members of the family. So would you come to Fairfield from the farm for your church?
We did. Our dad, when he grew up, went to the Salina church because it had a Swedish church.
Right.
And so where we grew up was 5 miles from Salina, 5 miles from Fairfield. So when our grandparents decided that Dad needed confirmation, they switched to Fairfield to go to the First Lutheran Church. That's where our parents met, and so the rest is history.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Terrific. When you weren't planting or milking cows or other things, did you go fishing? Did you have tractor pulls? Did you pitch horseshoes?
I'm laughing, sorry, because our sister-in-law always tells us most fish most people fish and hunt, your family goes to meetings. And it's true.
Okay,
true.
well, that's
A lot
why
of
the,
community service.
that's
yeah.
why the community has grown, because of that. Terrific. Okay, since you grew up in the 50s and 60s, you probably had trucks and cars and things. You didn't do wagons and horses and things along the way. So, do you have any family stories of previous generations and how they would have to fix the wagons or get stuck or anything?
I have a picture in the exhibit where my dad and his brother and sister were burning the iron off the wood wagons for World War II because they needed the iron evidently for the war.
So, and then we're told, well, and guess our dad finally verified it, that when they were teenagers, he and his cousins took apart a wagon and put it back together on top of the barn for Halloween.
He didn't tell us that till he was in his 80s.
Right. We had heard stories, but he never verified it. So,
Oh, golly. Crank telephones, what was your communication when you were growing up?
I barely remember crank phones, but yeah, you did this,
Yeah.
or else you'd pick up the phone and somebody'd be on it, a party line.
yeah, we had the crank phones.
Yeah.
So our number was 65F21, 2 longs and a short.
2 longs and a short.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, there was always the operator that you had, if you wanted somebody someplace else other than on your local line, you had to contact. And, yeah,
Okay.
So-
So during your time of growing up, there was always that opportunity for communication through the phone
that
then.
way, yeah,
Okay.
as I remember.
Okay. I think you already told us when electricity arrived, and so we have that. When you did homework, did you have chalkboards besides pencils, or what? What did you do when you went to the country school, or did they go to Lockridge, or where does your
Okay.
elementary education?
I'm
You
gonna,
go first.
I will. I'll date myself. I'm the older one. So I was the last group to go to a one-room country school.
Okay.
And I was the first group to go to Fairfield.
Yeah. So I went to Buchanan number 5. There were 2 students in my class. Bob Prince and I were the 2 students in my class. There were 13 students in the entire school. And we had Mrs. Carl was a teacher, Mrs. Lynch was a teacher, Mrs. Collett was a teacher, and those are the only ones I recall. We had, outhouses, recess. We played softball games with some of the kids in the other schools. And we all seemed to turn out okay, very well.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
I had problems with fractions, and the teacher would get so upset with me, but until one day I got it, but before then it was hard.
And you were asking earlier about if doctors made house calls. I remember when I was in kindergarten, the teacher made the house call and she came and visited
Right, that's
us.
right. Visited you before school, yeah.
Terrific.
And then we had to go to our neighbor. One of our neighbors in the town Beth Guthrie was talking about had all of our school books. So we'd have to go to her house and pick up all of our books for class before school started.
How unique, how interesting. This is just you're just peeling an onion and
Yeah.
you're sharing this, and this is what we want to do. This is the purpose of this whole piece. Go ahead, Dee.
I just thought of something. I want to tell about a game that our dad told us on the day our brother passed away on his funeral. On the day of our brother's funeral, it was a very sad day in our family. And that evening, my brother's family and our families were gathered at my parents'. And we were talking about old times. And our dad started talking about a game he used to play as a child. And it was called Mumblety Peg. And I actually have the wooden piece that's here in the exhibit for that. And I had to look it up on the internet to see exactly, because I remember Dad talking about it, something about throwing knives. But back when they were kids, they would somehow throw knives, and it had to do with getting close to the peg. But these were the kinds of games they had to play, because they all had pocket knives when they were kids.
Sure, sure. Well, I think we've covered an awful lot. I'm so glad that you've made the journey to Fairfield, Dee being here, but this is the second month that we have done this, and so we are just beginning, but we have 14 families that are this heritage farm, 150 years plus in the same lineage on that. And so what our mission is to record this, but then to have the display for a month, and hopefully we can extend to a longer time at another location, but that'll be determined. But I do want to thank both of you for the time that you have given, for sharing of your memorabilia, and we hope that the folks are able to enjoy and learn about these folks that were here before us. And like you say, how many different families are intertwined? You started listing the different names of the folks that are still in Fairfield and Jefferson County on that. Diane, any closing comments, any thoughts that have come that you'd like to share before we wrap this up?
Well, I appreciate you doing this very much, and the community. I think it's very important to keep the history, and then also it got us motivated again, to look at our history, where we came from. And I guess the one thing I do want to share is when Dee and I were growing up, and now I'll get sad, I'm sorry. Anyway, we were taught, you take care of the land and you pass it on. And as you can see, that's how we achieve the land. And that is what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, it's all about taking care of the land.
Yeah. Because it's there, it's a gift from God, and you only have it one time. And if you don't, it's going to be gone. So wonderful. Yeah. Well, Diane, Dee, thank you both very much for representing your families. And we've learned a lot, and we'll share this with the public going forward.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.